no regrets, no confusion. There'll be no pollution. I'm so thankful I've decided to change my ways.
Welcome back to the Leaving Eden podcast. How are you today, Sadie?
I am doing so well. It's about 90 degrees today in Portland, and I have acquired air conditioning.
I'm so proud of you. I also have air conditioning. Those were a rough couple of summers, man, when, ooh.
I remember last year when we first moved into this house and I was recording in a closet, and I would open the closet door and leave the closet when I was done recording our episode, and the temperature in the room outside the closet would be like 95, and it felt so cool compared to in the closet where I had been.
And then there was the apartment that you were living in before that where you were so miserable. I'm glad that your situation has significantly upgraded, because it was truly like a potentially dangerous situation to be in a place where it's that hot. I am about to go on my annual Jersey Shore vacation. So, and
Nice.
it's about to be hot in Philadelphia this weekend, but I'm going to skip that. We're going to Sea Isle City, New Jersey, and I might be there because apparently I don't know exactly what day I'm coming home, but apparently one of the days next week there's going to be a Jason Kelsey celebrity bartender appearance. So I might end up going to that. I don't know. I'm going to the beach. Sadie is hanging out inside where it is nice and cool. So we're all doing good. But today we're talking about, there was a documentary that came up on Netflix it must have been almost a month ago, Dancing for the Devil, the 7M TikTok cult, that was about a church in California that preyed on young dancers and other people as well to try to get them to join this cult and try to exploit them for labor, exploit them for money. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. I thought this documentary was very good. Sadie, what any general thoughts on it before we...
No, let's just jump in because I have the thing that I want to say is a good intro.
Oh, okay,
for
cool.
the episode.
So before we get into that, the Leaving Eden podcast is the podcast about my BFF and co-host, cult expert, cult survivor, Sadie Carpenter, her life in and escape from the Independent Fundamental Baptist cult, the cult in which she was raised. We talk about this cult. We talk about other cults. We talk about religion. We talk about fundamentalism. We talk about the real and present threat that cults and cult ideologies pose to society as a whole. And it is our goal to promote freedom of mind, freedom of thought, and freedom of religion. So if you like our show, if you are a fan of our show, then there are a few things that you can do in order to support us. You can join our Patreon, patreon.com/Leaving Eden podcast, where you get extended, uncensored, ad-free versions of most of our episodes, as well as you get the episodes a couple of days early. So if you just can't wait until Monday, you want to listen to it over the weekend, maybe you got a road trip coming up for the summer, and you're leaving on a Friday, and maybe you want a podcast to listen to in the car, well, you can join our Patreon, and the latest episode will show up in your Patreon, I think, at midnight Eastern time on Friday night. So you'll be able to have that there on your road trip if you want to go on a road trip. Great for summer. You can also purchase our merchandise. We have a Threadless shop. Threadless shop is cool. We had a couple of new designs for Pride Month. We have the Dinah Housefire design come out for Pride Month last month. And just so everyone knows, any Pride merch that you buy, even if it's not during Pride Month, the proceeds still go to Point of Pride. They still go to the good cause. So it's not like we stop doing that when Pride Month is over.
Yeah, we're not trying to do a rainbow capitalism here.
No, that's not really what we're about. And it would also be weird if we were selling Dinah Housefire merch and then pocketing the money, because Dinah's our friend, but also that would be weird. Not about that. So if you buy Pride merch, then the Pride merch goes to the Point of Pride, which is and I think without further ado, is it time for me to thank the patrons?
I think it's time.
Thank the patrons, yeah. So if our I Gave It All to Your patrons, we have a new I Gave It All to Your patron.
What?
And that is Alicia Guild, who has been a Faith Promise Missions to Your patron for a while, but Alicia Guild is I Gave It All to Your patron now. And thank you so much for joining at this incredible tier of our Patreon. I'm baffled that we have anybody contributing at this tier, but the fact that you have decided to join this tier of our Patreon, it is truly incredible.
Welcome, Alicia.
Our other I gave it all to your patrons are Kathleen Moncrief, I'm Not 1010, Melissa Manown, Melora King, and Todd Dale on behalf of his wonderful Deconstructorenex of a spouse, Madeline Antrim. Thank you guys so much for contributing at the I Gave It All tier.
Thank you so much to the I Gave It All tier patrons for putting your metaphorical wedding rings in our metaphorical offering plate. Please do not actually send us your wedding rings.
Please don't do that. Please don't send us your wedding rings or watches. This is like... we don't want to be an actual cult. Although that would be a fun idea for an episode. What if we started a cult? What would it look like?
We did that. We did that on our first anniversary episode.
How do you remember something and I don't remember it? I
don't know. This is the first time this has ever happened. It's a little bit scary. So I was talking about what I would have for the cult uniform.
I do remember that.
Yeah.
And you would want it to be like robes and stuff. And I was like,
no, like jewel tones and flowy clothing with options. Like when people have their bridesmaids and people say like, oh, bridesmaids can wear any dress as long as it's from this website and this particular color. So it's all the same color and then different dress styles. That is the vision I have for the cult. Like everybody's in an approved color palette, but there's a lot of freedom within that color palette for styles and cuts and things.
So it's like how the Rajneeshis would have you dye all your clothes red.
Okay, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay, we get it. We're on the same page here. But it would have to be a color palette that I'm good with because I would also be somehow involved in this cult, I assume.
I like jewel tones.
Big
fan of jewel tones. And then it was, you could earn... Everybody, once you were a member of the cult, you got a specific jar for your brain that was placed in the special place for the brain jars. But if you were a good cult member, you could upgrade your brain jar and get one that was sparkly.
Yeah, I mean, if we ever started a podcast network, we would have to call it Brain and Jar Podcast Network. But actually, anyway, I need to thank our Faith Promise Missions tier patrons. Your names are Alex P, Allie Allen, Autumn of Our Discontent, Brittany, Chrissa Walker, Dora J, Eleanor Donahue, Hannah Ross, Hannah Montana, Henwin the Magnificent. Thank you, Henwin the Magnificent. Hope Norum, Horton Here's a Shane, Janine Collin, Jana Connor, Jen Kaharski, Jessica Tambo, Jonna, Junie B. Jones, and the B stands for bisexual. Hell yeah.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride. It is technically still Pride Month when we are recording this, so happy Pride. Kat Henwood, Kay Turwee, Kristen Marie, Learned Vixen, Linda Morgan, Madeline Antrim, Madeline Cusick, Maddie the Seventh Day Badventist, Mary Martin, Marlena Stuve, Megan Arendt, Morgan, Rob the Methodist, Stephanie Johnson, Steve and Amy, Susie, Tara McNamara, Wes the Cowboy, and Zoe Shuck. Thank you guys so much for your Patreon contributions, and thank you to all of our patrons.
Absolutely.
And anyone who supports this show by doing other things, just by sharing it with your friends, your family, coworkers. It all helps. It's all good. Anyway, Sadie's going to hit the TW, and then we are going to be right on our way.
In general, we talk about a lot of potentially triggering topics on our show, including but not limited to suicide and mental health, racism, misogyny, PTSD and PTSD symptoms, child abuse, mental, physical, and sexual abuse, and spiritual abuse, including guilt, shame, and fear. In most episodes, we will mention at least a few of these topics, but we try to avoid any graphic detail unless it's relevant to the story that we're telling, and we do our best to give the audience a heads up before we get into that kind of detail if we do feel it's necessary for an episode. So I watched this documentary, Dancing for the Devil, and I thought that this would be a totally different cult because it's on TikTok and it's a management company. And the more, as I started watching the documentary, I found so many things that were so very familiar They pulled it up to watch it, and the first episode is titled "Die to Yourself," which is a phrase that will be very, very familiar for anyone who grew up IFB and a lot of people who grew up evangelical, Protestant, Christian. So I quickly learned that it is not that different from any other cult.
I know. I thought that when I pulled it up, I thought this was going to be like, oh, there's a cult where they're like indoctrinating the kids into, with TikTok algorithms or blah, 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 but no, it was just people who happen to be in a line of entertainment work, i.e. dancing on TikTok, get sucked into a cult that exploits their labor, get sucked into a management company that exploits their labor. And that management company uses essentially Christian fundamentalism to do that.
Yeah, and even within the first couple minutes, I was wondering, there's a clip from 4 minutes and 38 seconds in the first episode. I was wondering if you could play that little clip for us.
Hallelujah. Miranda's family decided to go on Instagram and start a campaign against us, calling us a cult organization. And there was an article. The title was, "A TikTok Star Joins Cult." We have now attention from media. We have, every day, production companies wanting
so
to
in this
do a
clip,
documentary
Robert
series
Shin,
with
the
our group.
pastor of Shekinah Church, which
quite
we're going to
famous.
learn a lot about, is making comments on an article that came out comparing his group, his church, to a cult. He is leading the audience to laugh at these allegations. And I heard in his voice the way that he leads the audience to laugh about this. And it immediately was such a red flag to me of, oh no, this is actually a cult.
Right. And we've seen this so many times I've listened to how many Jack Hyles sermons have I listened to?
More
You've
than
listened
anyone ever should.
But still, like, you've listened to probably an order of magnitude more than I have. But that was a thing that he would do either with, laughing, or he would be like, oh, this is a thing that you need to be angry about. And I'm going to act out my anger. And now you have to act out your anger in response to me acting out my anger. These days, I think that you would hear it like, if they're like, and they're saying women are playing basketball now. And then they expect you to laugh at that, like.
Right, you're being led into an emotional response that bolsters the leader's emotional response and bonds you with the other people in the audience. That's the whole thing. That's the whole point.
Well, it's like the power thing that you told me about like years ago when we first did it, to try to illustrate the how the behavior control can turn into like an emotion control kind of thing, because it becomes almost like a humiliation or like a that kind of tactic. And
it's a bonding ritual between members. So this happens, this is not something that is exclusive to high control groups or cults. This is something that you see in political speeches, something that you see in even in academic contexts. This is a tactic that people who are speaking to an audience use. However, when I see it used in a church group that already has cult allegations being made about it, and when the leader is telling you to laugh at the idea that they might be a cult, that is a really, really big red flag.
It's the same kind of technique. If you're a musician, you can have a part of your song that's really easy to sing along to, and then you sing the part, and then you let the audience sing the next part because they know all the words to it. And, really, it's like we're on the same level. We're bonded here in doing this. And I've been to concerts where that's been a thing. Like I went and saw Paul McCartney and they did the na 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 nas at the end of Hey Jude. But it's also something that I've seen Christian music. If you go to like a praise and worship kind of music service, but that's the same technique that's being displayed here.
Right. So it's a technique that's neutral. It's not inherently harmful or bad. But in this particular case, it really caught my attention because the thing that he is causing people to laugh at is these very serious allegations. And it reminded me of when I was taught to laugh at the phrase millions of years, referring to dinosaurs or evolution or science. It's that type of control, in my opinion. The other thing that I noticed is in that clip you may have heard, one person, sounds like a feminine voice, laughs louder and longer than everyone else in the room. Did you notice that?
Yes.
Did that send up alarm bells or red flags for you when you watched the documentary the first time?
When I hear something like that, I always think of like, oh, this person's going the extra mile because they want to be seen as the person who goes the extra mile, and they're trying to curry favor. It's like, I heard this story about Joseph Stalin. His speeches would go on forever because nobody would want to be the one who would be seen to be the first to stop clapping.
That is very much what I saw, or what I heard when I heard this clip. I noticed that one person, and it sounds like they are also sitting closer to the microphone. If you listen carefully to the clip, it sounds like this is someone in the front row, because you can hear that they are seated closer to the microphone than
Teacher's pet.
Yes.
But actually,
so I'm listening to a clip of a church service, and the pastor says, leads the congregation to laugh at allegations that he may be a cult leader and that his church may be a cult. And as he does that, one person, it's not subtle, one person laughs so much more loudly and so much longer than the rest of the congregation, as if they are trying to get attention and get favor from this leader. And when you put all of those things together, 5 minutes into this documentary, and I was paying a lot of attention.
So the story of this documentary, it follows the Wilking sisters and their parents, Miranda and Melanie Wilking, and their parents, Kelly and Dean. Miranda and Melanie are two sisters from Detroit, Michigan, grew up loving dance and loving performing arts. And when TikTok becomes a popular form of social media, they are so skilled at dance that they start to become popular and very heavily followed on the platform. And they kind of take this opportunity to say, well, let's move to Los Angeles where we can be dance influencers and we can, do the dance that we want to do and pursue our dream, of being basically professional performers and make a good living doing it, which, that's the dream. They had supportive parents, and it seemed honestly like, wow, good for them. I was so happy for them watching it. Miranda, unfortunately, gets sort of pulled in with these other dancers who are kind of part of this church group and indoctrinated into this church group that is Shekinah Church, which is led by Robert Shin in the Los Angeles area in California.
So Robert Shin is the pastor of this church, and he is also the head of 7M Films,
Yes.
And a 7M management agency. He's got a ton of businesses. He has a realty business and mortgage business and flower shops and coffee shops. He's a serial or multi-entrepreneur, as well as pastoring Shekinah Church. So the way that he gets connected to these dancers is there is a whole dance community on TikTok, and this made me feel really old because I've never seen dance community on TikTok.
Oh, I knew about this.
The only dances that I see on TikTok are like people doing 1940s like specific swing dance stuff.
I'm not on TikTok, but I knew this existed.
I knew it existed, but it has never come up on my For You page, and that makes me feel old.
And they're very talented. These are people who are who have like worked their whole lives.
These are very, very talented young people who do a modern or hip hop dance style, and there's a whole community of people who became very popular doing this on TikTok.
And they're all friends with each other, and it seems like if you have a creative community and you're that good and your video is blowing up like that, then these are the people that you would want to surround yourself with. Right.
So they're all friends, they all do collaborations and cross-promote, and it is getting to a point where several of the young people in this friendship group have become really popular on TikTok, are making money through brand deals, are making a real career out of TikTok dancing. And a lot of these people use the same videographer, Isaiah Shin, and Isaiah's father, Robert Shin, who is the pastor of Shekinah Church and has all of these businesses, starts recruiting the dancers that work with his son as their videographer to be a part of his management company so that he can negotiate brand deals on their behalf, negotiate finances on their behalf, and according to him, make them rich, make them millionaires.
So this, on its face, is not something that is particularly seedy. This is not something that is like, if you're this popular and this successful, should be out of the ordinary. The problem is that what he then went on to do after it.
Yeah, people have management companies. I think the people that I know that are the most followed on social media, like people like Alora, who guested on our podcast, a lot of the people that I know tend to do it on their own and manage themselves. But people have management companies. It is a thing, not inherently shady, like you were saying.
I mean, it's just like if we had a podcast network and we were working with somebody who was like, okay, well, we're going to be your, we're going to get you brand deals and we're going to, get, spots and promotions on your podcasts, and make.
Yeah, I mean, we do work with companies that get us brand deals.
Yeah, and we've all done that and stuff. So
it's not all that unusual,
especially if you're looking at like the kind of reach and the follower count that these dancers have, because they're having 1.5, 2.5 million people following them on TikTok.
The Wilkins sisters, I think, topped out at 3.3 million. So where things started to go wonky is these dancers are young people. They're often in LA without the support of their family. Like their family will be in, for example, Detroit, Michigan. They're in a new place. They don't have a lot of in-person support. And they get involved with this management company. And it turns out that everybody who is managed by this management company is personally involved with this pastor, Robert Shin. And he will start inviting people to his house to have dinner. I know Melanie was talking about how she was invited over for dinner, and at the end of dinner, Robert said to her, "You have sinned 1,000 times today, and if you died right now, you would go to hell."
That is IFB.
It is incredibly IFB. That is true. Also, it is recruitment. So she's there with all of these people that she respects and works with and are her friends who are already members in this church. And the pastor, who is also in charge of her management company, starts to pressure her about salvation. He gets everyone in a circle around her to lay hands on her and speak in tongues and tells her that now she is saved. And this church is invitation only, which is odd to me.
That seems like that's a red flag for a church.
That is absolutely a red flag. And I'm going to get into it a little bit more like after we take up our first offering break. I have stuff to say.
Yeah, I mean, how many churches are like is Westboro Baptist Church is like invitation only?
Technically,
right?
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Miranda gets pressured into this salvation experience and invited to come to the church, and the church is invitation only, and it makes people feel special when they get invited. Miranda starts going to church at Shekinah Church occasionally until one day she gets a call from Chloe Shin, the pastor's daughter. Chloe says Melanie was supposed to take someone to the airport that morning, but she got a call from Chloe, the pastor's daughter, who said, "Well, I just spoke to the pastor and he said that he really needs you to hear his word today in his sermon. He really needs you in church today."
Okay, but that mirrors absolutely stuff that we've heard from people like you and from other IFB survivors, that it's like, no, this is something that you need to do now.
I know. So this is, I went into this expecting it to be a cult in the way that we talk about certain MLMs being cults or certain non-religious high control groups or pseudo-religious high control groups. I did not expect this to be so very fundamentalist.
And I've noticed this about cult documentaries that have come out in the past 2 years, I want to say. That, and I don't know what the shift was, but I watched some, when we were doing like Branch Davidian's episode like 2.5, 3 years ago, I watched a bunch of documentaries about Branch Davidians that had been made during like the decade prior. And I've watched documentaries about other cults that have been made, you know, during the prior decade or decades when of like cult documentaries. And it was all about like the flash, and it was all about like the crazy thing that they convinced these people to do, but they never really got into this is how they operate on a day-to-day level. This is how the control actually happens. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's just been a string of 3 or 4 or 5 documentaries that have all come out that have really gotten into it. Like Twin Flames was a good one. This one was a good one. Of course, Shiny Happy People, Let Us Pray last fall that came out as well. Like they've all just been like hit. Like they've all really dug to the core of it. And I thought this one did as well.
I was surprised by how typical the cult tactics used by this group are, but I was also surprised by how fundamentalist the theology was. That kind of started to scare me halfway through the first episode.
There was a lot of like, you know, once saved, always saved. There was a lot of the first episode was called Die to Oneself, or Die to Yourself. Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, do you want to take up the offering and then come back and talk about the Die to Yourself theology? Because it is almost exactly what I learned in the IFB, but it's a little bit different.
That sounds good.
Hey, Sadie here. If this is your first time listening to the Leaving Eden podcast, make sure you go back and check out episode 57. It's a primer episode for new listeners. That episode tells my personal story and gives you all the terms and information that you'll need to know going forward. Also, check out our cult true crime series, The First Family of Fundamentalism, so that you can get the whole cult story. If you like our show, you can support us by joining our Patreon, where we have extended and uncensored episodes as well as other bonus content available. You can also join in the discussion in our Facebook group. That group is called Eden Exodus. Tell a friend, tell a family member, tell your worst enemy. The Leaving Eden podcast is a fully independent podcast, and we really appreciate your support. Now, back to the show.
We are back from our break. We've kind of given the overview of what's gone on in this documentary, just the sort of the basic first part of it. But now we're going to talk about the actual theology. Two main things that I want to talk about are when he used the Die to Yourself language. And the second thing was when he used the passage about being lukewarm from Revelation.
Correct. So let's talk about the die to yourself, die to your family thing, because that all ties in, I think, to the overall theology of the group. So the thing that Robert Shen said to his members that was a little bit unique was you need to die to your family in order to save them. So I have a clip from episode 1 at 36 minutes, 15 seconds. He says, "You're not Jesus' disciple until you die to your loved ones."
Different kind of love. You're not Jesus' disciple until you die to your loved ones.
One of the main things we were learning is that you have to die to your family in order to save them. And by save them, I mean like them going to heaven one day, even if they don't go to church all the time. You need to die to them. That way, at least you can follow your walk with God. And if you get into heaven, they're going to come with you.
He's not using this exactly in the way that the IFB does. And as I started to dig into this, I got the most that I'm able to be, the greatest extent to which I am going to be able to understand this theology. I did try to research where Robert may have been theologically influenced. I looked up to see if he was connected to any authors or seminaries or anything at all. And I just could not find that because of the secrecy of this church. And that bugged me because I really feel like there could be an IFB connection.
The thing that they sort of alluded to in the documentary was that he had kind of mannerisms that seemed to be taken from Black church, like from like a Black Baptist church.
Yes.
So it wasn't like he was going full like IFB, because that would have been slightly different mannerisms, and he doesn't like.
Yeah, you're right. The feel of the service or the mannerisms when he is preaching, the clothing that he wears when preaching are not IFB flavor. They are a mix of Korean Pentecostal and American Black churches that he surely was influenced by at some point.
How much do you know about Korean Pentecostal beliefs?
A very vague overview. Well, we just talked about some branches of Pentecostal because we just talked about Mary Cosby. And it is, Pentecostal theology is not as different from Baptist theology as I was led to believe growing up. A lot of the fruit ends up being the same. It just adds, there are different views of the Trinity that may or may not come into play with Pentecostal theology. There are different views of the purpose, the form, and the function of the Holy Spirit. But a lot of the practical day-to-day stuff turns out very much the same. Don't go to movies, wear certain clothes, be holy.
Of course, he doesn't have all of that because he's out here actively trying to participate in the culture and trying to milk money out of whatever, like the zeitgeist of what popular culture is.
Right.
In that he's had a couple of different endeavors where there's people who he's managed he's tried to get as singers, as actors, and then the dancers is where he really took off because they'd already proved themselves. It wasn't like, oh, here is somebody who is in my church who I'm trying to get out there and trying to promote like that. These were people who were already successful that he managed to recruit in from the outside.
So I want to talk about the die to yourself thing again, and before we come back and talk about his personal control over people. This is not exactly the die to yourself stuff that I was raised with in the IFB. What I was raised with in the IFB often goes back to, I believe it's Romans 12:1-2. What know ye not, that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which you have of God. Ye are not your own, for you are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do. Anyway.
So what does that mean for me who is not a Christian?
So in the IFB, it tends to be keep your body holy, follow the rules. Your body does not belong to you. Your body belongs to God. You are only an instrument of God. And the closer that you can be to being like a puppet of God, the better. The less resistance you put up to what God wants to do with your body, your human actions on earth, your emotions, your words, the less resistance you put up to that and the more that you let God control you fully, the better.
So that seems very similar to also the Scientology concept of externalization.
Mm-hmm.
Where the idea is that when you become, if you follow the Scientology rules enough and do their mind control exercises enough, then your life will almost be like you're just watching yourself go through it in third person.
Yes. Dying to yourself is about, in the IFB perspective, is about letting God control your life and your actual individual actions as much as possible. However, in Shekinah Church, dying to yourself is about letting Robert Shin control you as much as possible. So he will say, die to your family. And what he means is not the IFB sense, which is try not to want anything, try not to do anything of your own accord, try to always ask God before you do anything, try to be a puppet of God on earth. What Robert means is disconnect and detach yourself from your family and make Shekinah Church your family. And if you do this, your family can go to heaven. Theologically, it gets a bit weird. Robert said, I have a quote. Robert said, "Even if you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, you will still go to hell because I am the only person who has the true message of salvation."
Wow, where have I heard that from before? That sounds like Jim Jones.
A few places,
that sounds
probably.
Like David Koresh. That sounds like...
Yeah. Robert says, "I've gotten to know you in a way that even your family members have never gotten to know you." He talks about making the church your family because Robert is the only one who has the true message of salvation, and the only way to go to heaven is either being a part of Shekinah Church or having a family member who is part of Shekinah Church who is sacrificing on your behalf.
Is that in the Bible anywhere, or is that just...
No, that's just him.
That seems like that's made up.
It's definitely made up.
A lot of the people that were the dancers in the church were people who were nominally Christian or some level of Christian before they joined the church. I don't want to say they should have known, but like they possibly would have known, okay, well, that's not really in the Bible, or maybe they just weren't paying attention. Or
Oh, see, I totally disagree. Because
Really?
someone who is nominally Christian will have heard the phrase, "die to yourself," in church growing up at some point.
But they wouldn't have asked what it means, and then this guy's telling you, no, this is what it means.
This is what it means. Somebody like you who has never heard that phrase before, you'd be like, WTF, die to myself? Die to what? What now? But somebody who had gone to church a few times as a kid, or gone to VBS, or has some amount of cultural Christianity that is not being raised immersed in religion, would be familiar with the phrase. So when somebody comes by and tells them, well, this is what it really means, it makes total sense.
But if somebody came up to somebody like me and said, oh, well, you're going to go to hell, you've committed 1,000 sins today, I would say hell is fake and you're a fraud.
Right. But somebody who has been raised around Christianity with a familiarity with Christianity is much more likely to accept that. So there are a couple cult-like things going on here. The big one that I noticed is that all of this stuff about die to your family is in-group, out-group thinking, which is a form of information control. But it's done in a uniquely layered way that I noticed in Shekinah Church. So Robert will say, you have to die to yourself so that you can go to heaven, but also die to your family so that your family can go to heaven. So it's a layered thing of your family who may not want you to be a part of this church or this management company are wrong and you should ignore them, which is very normal cult type coercion. But then it goes a step further to your ignoring them can potentially be the factor that saves them from hell.
And that is really messed up because it makes like their lives as the things that that is in danger. Like it's not like, even if you're like, well, like you get to a point where you're so miserable that you're like, I don't care if I live or die anymore. You still, that gives you something to hold on to.
Exactly.
That is so devious. That is extremely, I don't like that.
So we've got the die to yourself, and then we also have a lot of more tangible methods of control that we should talk about. One quote that I pulled was, "By getting close to Robert, I was getting close to God."
I mean, how often have we heard that said about, I don't know, Mary Cosby,
Jack Hyles,
Jack Scop, David Koresh.
And this is when
Jim
it started
Jones.
to sink in for me, like, oh, this is just like a regular cult.
I mean, this is like any other extreme fundamentalist church that we've talked about, except for that it also they are recruiting they have more money because they're making money off of their TikTok dancers. They're not making money off of starting a Bible college or making money off of what did Mary Cosby off of like real estate. Or although they were making money off of real estate. They
they had a real estate firm. And I want to talk about that. So this church began recruiting immigrants to the United States.
They were going after Korean immigrants.
Yes. The documentary laid out how Korean immigrants often join a church in the United States because it is the Korean cultural center in their lives. It's where they have Korean food and Korean holidays and interact with their home culture. So church can be very important, specifically to Korean immigrants. And you would even see this in, you even see that in shows like Kim's Convenience, where church is a cultural thing as well as a religious meeting place. Before this church started recruiting TikTok dancers and talent, they recruited young people who needed a place to stay or a place to work. And that is how the two sisters that we learned about, Priscilla and
Melanie Lee,
that's how they got involved with the church, because their parents were not capable of fully taking care of them. And as teenagers, like late teenagers, they got involved with this church. They lived in a house that was called the Glory Girls house, where everything was regimented, scheduled. You had a roommate, you were up at 5 a.m, and you were at church by 6 to pray, where you worked for one of Robert's businesses and were paid very little. So this is where we get into the financial control, which is pretty scary.
7M, the management company, and Shekinah Church, they would take a 7M, the management company that was controlling these dancers, would take a management fee, which would be like 20%. That's normal within the within the entertainment industry. If you're paying somebody who's getting your booking or whatever, or if you're an athlete or something, you have an agent, you have to pay them somewhere 10, 20%, whatever, of whatever you make. But on top of that, they've got to pay
rent.
They've got to pay rent, which they're paying to the church, and then
because they live in church-owned housing, which means Robert-owned housing.
And then they've got to pay tithe and offering, and they've got to pay what is it? Faith promise? No,
a 10% man of God fee.
Which is just, here's money that goes to Robert, and the other money goes to the church or something. They have tithe and offering.
You can see how this got people into a really coercive and upsetting position. So even before 7M, management company was a thing. People like Melanie and Priscilla Lee lived in church housing. They worked for Robert, and then the church would deposit large amounts of money into their bank account and have Priscilla get a whole book of blank checks and sign each check. So the church would put large amounts of money into her bank account and then pay itself through her checks. The pastor's wife would write checks to the church from Priscilla's bank account, and Priscilla was told, well, you need to let the pastor or the pastor's wife have access to your bank account because that is evidence that you have died to yourself. So it all ties into this financial control. When we get to talking about the TikTok dancers, it's a really messed up situation because they are living in a house that is owned by this church. Their management agency is owned by Robert, who is the pastor of this church. Their income depends on this person. Their rent also gets paid to this person. And they are told that they have to give their mentors in the church direct access to their bank account, because that is how you prove that you have died to yourself. That is how you prove that you want to get closer to Robert and therefore get closer to God. Money laundering didn't come up in the documentary.
No, but that seems like that's a crime that they should be interested in.
That money laundering is definitely a crime. And if anybody did it in this situation, I certainly hope that they get caught, because the math did not appear to math to me, but I'm no expert. So these people were financially tied to this church. And then Robert would also use his platform in church services to praise and control people in a way that is almost identical to things that Jack Hyles did. Do you want to take up the offering and come back and talk about that?
Yeah, let's do that. We are back from our break. So far, we've talked about the financial control that Shekinah Church and 7M management had over the TikTok dancers as well as the people who were members of 7M Church.
So
or Shekinah Church.
Yeah. There was one thing that really caught my attention near the end of episode 2. If you didn't do, as a member of Shekinah Church, if you didn't do what Robert told you, he would call you out by name from the pulpit, and he called this rebuking people. If you did well, so for example, when these dancers would book a commercial and we're going to make a lot of money off of it, Robert would praise you from the pulpit.
And he'd talk about how much money they were making.
Yeah, I specifically remember Aubrey got a toilet paper commercial.
And he talked about the toilet paper. He talked about the
Yeah, and that to me seemed like a Jack Hyles poking fun at somebody.
It was a little negging, wasn't it?
It was a little negging, but also telling people exactly what the amount was that he was going to make on that commercial, which was $37,500. I don't know why it stuck with me, but it did. And telling people, praising people directly from the pulpit.
But there's a lot of prosperity gospel in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
That he is saying these people have decided to give money to this church. These people have decided to give money and be good members of this church. And now God is rewarding them with even greater and better opportunities.
Right. God is going to make us famous. God is going to make all of us millionaires. I will make you millionaires. So there is a lot of prosperity gospel. And then it's being combined with this very public control from the pulpit, because former members told us in the documentary, if you weren't getting mentioned from the pulpit, you got worried. You felt unloved. You felt like you weren't participating. Even if Robert brought you up from the pulpit to rebuke you, to call you on the carpet for something that you had done against the rules or against him, that was still a positive thing. You were told that that God loves the people who get rebuked. I love who I rebuke. So if you're not getting called out for disobeying, you're not loved. You're not on the pastor's mind. And that's a problem.
I mean, that just seems so analogous to, interpersonal abuse. Like if you're in a like domestic abuse situation, even the abuse, like when we had Shoshana on and we were talking about, I think, Michael and Debbie Pearl, to train up a child. Shoshana made the point that even physical abuse feels like attention.
Yep.
That and I definitely see an analog there.
So I think it's predictable that all of this did eventually lead to allegations of sexual assault between Robert and young women in the church. And even more predictably, his response was to invoke King David and apologize publicly to the church by saying that they seduced him and he was only human and he was tempted and please forgive him.
I mean, this was straight out of the Jack Scott playbook.
This blew my mind. Like, they only have one excuse, that he would bring up King David. It was wild to me to see that coming from outside of, I'm so used to hearing that from Baptist men at large, but hearing that from somebody outside of my little circle of churches kind of blew my mind.
Well, you hear people talk about that with the guy that's running for president right now. Mm-hmm. You hear people talk about, like, especially after, he's been convicted of a crime where he cheated on his wife with a porn star and then paid her hush money, and people are saying, well, he's, you know, it's like King David. King David strayed from his marriage bed and
right. And or the guy, pastor of one of the largest or the largest church in the Southern Baptist Convention, Robert Morris, who very recently got exposed for doing just about the same thing with an underage girl, and I hope gets investigated.
I hope he goes to jail for that one.
Yeah.
I saw that one. That was messed up.
I would like that.
Prison.
So a lot of the women in the church left when Robert was originally exposed for these sexual assaults. Some stayed, and some people continued to be assaulted by him for years. There was Priscilla was saying 10 years. So that you were saying earlier that this really illustrates why it's hard to leave and why survivors are sometimes not taken seriously. And I definitely want to make sure we talk about that.
And yeah, I thought that was one of the things that I think this documentary did the best at showing, because, you know, they had the parents and they had the survivors of 7M, because all of these, you know, young dancers who come and join this company essentially cut off from their families, and their families all, you know, when this started blowing up on social media and people started realizing that this was going on, the families all found each other and kind of created a support network. And they tried going to the police, and, you know, ex-members started going to the police, and the police, you know, and members who had been subjected to some sort of sexual abuse or sexual violence. And the police said, we'll come back with more stories and we'll take action. And they came back with more stories, and the police didn't do anything. They didn't take any action.
So survivors ended up serving Robert and other church leaders with court papers in person, which I thought was incredibly badass.
They decided to file a lawsuit against him. And they, in order to file a lawsuit, you have to actually serve somebody with the papers for the lawsuit. I think we're all familiar with this. But legally speaking, you can't, if you're party in the lawsuit, you can't be the one to serve papers. But the people who were parties in the lawsuit all said, no, I want to be there when it happens. So rather than hiring a company to go and be the process server, they went and got their friends to go do it for them so they could be there for it.
Yeah, this was really cool. Gavi asked me off mic earlier if I ever have reason to serve like Jack Scopp or Dave Hiles or whoever, will I let him be the server?
And she's considering it.
Well, you're the first person to ask, so you have to be the first person on the list.
Okay. Well, I mean, there might be somebody else who's like who actually has trauma related to one of those people, but is not party to the lawsuit, that might want to do it instead. But
right,
like,
which is the only reason I don't say absolutely yes, but I have absolutely put you on the list.
Can I at least be like wheelman or something?
Yeah.
You know, if we're in a car and because they had a full on stakeout outside the church. And they were following his car, and he was like ducking and running red lights to try to get away from them.
Yeah.
And he pulled into a Korean restaurant where they found him, and then they served him papers at the restaurant.
So towards the end of the documentary, a lot of the people who had left are talking about things that were so familiar to me. How did I get here? Like, how did I let this happen to myself? And talking about the struggles of getting the legal system to take you seriously. Because it's not illegal to run a cult. It's all the other illegal things that cult leaders tend to be doing that get them in legal trouble.
It's kind of like they got Al Capone for tax evasion. Exactly.
So at the end of the documentary, Miranda Derrick now is still affiliated with 7M. She and her husband are. And she is now able to speak with her family a little bit more. And her family still feel that she is brainwashed by 7M and Shekinah Church. It's really interesting that they regained contact with her after years of not being in contact with her, and then chose to still make this documentary, even knowing that could be the end of them having contact with her forever. I thought that was a really brave and interesting choice.
when the heat started getting turned up on 7M and Shekinah Church, when it started sort of blowing up on social media, Robert started feeling really under pressure. And so what he did was he directed his members to go and make contact with their families again and just keep them at arm's length, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, I see how that could de-escalate the situation. It seems like it's getting bad. But on the other hand, he basically told them to do this so you can keep them at arm's length, and that will keep them placated or placated.
Mm-hmm.
Placated?
Yeah,
pacified, essentially. And so they won't try to do something crazy. On one hand, I do feel like that could go either way, because if you're trying to talk somebody down from an extremist position, you can't do that by just blowing up their spot and browbeating them into it. That's never going to work. You can't browbeat somebody into having an opinion or having a view or changing their view. You can only browbeat them into going along because they want the conversation to end, or they just want the unpleasantness to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a cult technique. What you can do is you can have an actual discussion with them about something like that, and maybe get some gears turning in their head where they change the way that they think about something, or they start asking questions.
So I was watching the end of this documentary, and I wanted to remind people that we did an episode about how to break someone out of a cult, hypothetically. It's back in, I think, the 50s. I think it's around episode 58 somewhere. Is that right?
Yeah, because 57 was the
57
primer
was
for
the
new
primer.
listeners. And I think 58 was how to break somebody out of a cult, if you know someone who is
Mm-hmm.
in.
That
That would be a fun one to do an update on.
Yeah, I would love to do an update. That episode, we talk about my opinions and my thoughts on what a person should do if they have a loved one who is in the cult. I noticed that people in this documentary were really doing a lot of things right, in my opinion, by continuing to be there for their loved ones, making contact as much as they can, encouraging questions and reminding them that if they're ever ready to leave, they always have a safe space. Those are some of the things that I recommended in that episode. I would really love to see an update for this documentary in a few years. I would love to see one of the dancers, or more than one of the dancers who are still affiliated with 7M, break away in a few years and give us even more information.
How do you feel about blowing up the spot and going public with all of this? Do you think that's positive? Do you think that's negative? More likely, less likely to help break somebody out? Do you think that's gonna shake the change loose, or do you think that's going to risk further alienating somebody?
That is a really great question. I think there's always certainly a risk that you'll further alienate somebody, because you have to think someone who is currently, let's talk about Miranda, for example. We don't know how controlled she is by her husband and her pastor. We don't know if she has large amounts of time alone every day where she could log on to Netflix and watch this documentary about herself. We don't know how prepped and primed she has been mentally for this documentary. So we don't know if she has access, or the free time, or the unsupervised time to sit down and watch it if she wanted to. We don't know if she's been brainwashed out of wanting to see the documentary. We also don't know if she's maybe been prepared for the documentary, so maybe they let her watch it, or even tell her to watch it, and sit and quote-unquote debunk the claims of the documentary while she is watching it.
That's a thing I've seen done. Who did that in the IFB? Somebody did that in the IFB.
Oh, I mean, they did that with, are you talking about creation and evolution stuff? Because they would show us.
Yeah.
They would show us evolutionist. Sorry, I know that's not the word. I slip into old habits.
Evolutionist.
No.
Yeah.
Textbooks, or we'd go to the museum and they would show these materials that supported the theory of evolution and then have us try to debunk in real time as we were encountering these materials. So that's something that could absolutely happen with a documentary like this. Or Miranda could have access to it and think, I don't want to watch that. I don't want to listen to my parents tell all these lies about me. Because if hypothetically she is brainwashed by this group, we don't know. There's always a mixture of a person's choice and coercive control and brainwashing that goes on when a person is in a cult or a high control group. And we do not know enough about this group to know what the particular mixture of self-brainwashing and outside brainwashing, or self-gaslighting and outside gaslighting, could be happening if she is hypothetically, as I think she is, brainwashed and controlled by this group 7M and Shekinah Church.
And she has since come out and said, Shekinah, I'm not in the cult. Everything that you see there, like she's made public statements as to that general effect,
as you would expect.
And also, it is a high risk, high reward sort of strategy, but also you've got to kind of accept that they've seen what it's like to have the, worst case scenario is that they lose any access to her, in their lives.
And that could happen without a documentary.
Right. And that's already happened.
Yeah.
To them. And then she came back because the heat was turned up.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe they're thinking, well, if that happened when the heat was turned up, if we turn it up even more and really start to push pressure on this church, maybe, the financial allegations about them, or maybe these lawsuits against them actually bear fruit, and, they get assets liquidated, they get, they lose money, they have to, turn up the heat. Like it's the same sort of thing that happened with SCOP when they had to, when Tom Kimmel went under.
And also it gives, maybe they are hoping to protect Miranda, because if this documentary had never gone out and people did not know about the allegations for this church and this management company, if Miranda just decided one day, she made an announcement that she was going to stop making videos forever and that her career was done, she was retiring, people would be sad, but it wouldn't be suspicious. And now, if she made that announcement today, it would be very suspicious. So maybe the family is thinking that they are giving her a layer of protection by making her even more of a public figure and having even more eyes on her. That could be another strategy.
Additionally, if she stops being a cash cow for Robert, which was one of the things that we saw happen, was that when the cult allegations came out, they started losing work. They started losing sponsorships, brand deals, things like that. And so that affected the income. And eventually it comes to the point where Miranda is no longer a generator of revenue for Robert and Shekinah. Then he stops needing her for things, and I don't want to say he lets her go, but he might, find a way to push her out, or and this is dark, but or try to like abuse her to the point where she would leave, and she would no longer feel welcome, or turn her, ostracize her in some way.
I definitely see that as a possibility, but what I see as more probable?
What?
Is Robert just kind of forgetting about people who are no longer useful to him and finding new people to pick on. Because remember what we were talking about with, if he doesn't rebuke you from the pulpit, then you're falling out of favor. If he's not picking at you, if he's not analyzing your behavior, then you're already on the way out. You need to do something to get his attention. And even negative attention from Robert is better than no attention. That makes me think of a kind of leader who just forgets about people when they're no longer useful and passes them over in favor of new people to begin to abuse. So if someone has been passed over in that way, they start to be desperate to get the attention of the leader, or they fade out of his rearview mirror.
And maybe, when that happens, either they say it's a lot harder to forgive somebody for being right than it is to forgive somebody for being wrong.
Yeah.
And I hope that there will be a situation in which, that family could be reconciled, but I just don't know.
It's hard to know exactly what the families involved in this documentary are hoping for, other than having their children back. But I also think maybe they are hoping to warn other people off of this management company. Maybe they're hoping to save somebody else's kid from what they believe has happened to their kid.
Yeah. No, that's true. Do you have any final thoughts on this before we wrap up?
My only final thought was, damn, cults only have one playbook.
No, it is like once you read it once, you see it everywhere.
I thought, this one is going to be different. This one, it's a different denomination. It's a different style of Christianity. It's people who are in Hollywood. It's with the standards and the rules are way different. It's involving dancers and TikTok, and this is going to be some new cult tactics that I've never heard of before. And that is not what happened.
Nope, literally the exact same thing.
Yep.
It's once you learn about this, you see it everywhere. I don't know. I feel like learning about coercive control should be required reading for every young person growing up, and being able to recognize this should be absolutely required. But anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode. Next week, we are going to do a bit of like a Fundy update. Just some stuff that's gone on over the past couple of months. I don't want to call it a Fundy snarking episode because we're kind of off of that, but just stuff that's been going on and in the culture, so to say, the zeitgeist.
I want to talk about Carissa Collins and Jill Rodriguez meeting in person and posting a picture.
That was like, that was like the Fundy version of, I'm trying to think what was the picture of Bruno Mars and Pete Wentz.
Yeah.
You've seen that picture? That's like the Fundy version of that one. Or like Pitbull featuring Kesha, Akon featuring T-Pain.
That was a jump scare.
Yeah.
I don't think anything really is going to come out of it, but it was certainly a jump scare.
No, it's exciting. I get to talk about women's basketball, which is fun, and what various fundies think about women's basketball. Anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning in. You guys have a great day. You can follow the podcast on social media at Leaving Eden Podcast. You can follow me at GAVRIELHACOHEN, and you can follow Sadie. See if I can get these right this time. At Sadie Carpenter Music on Instagram, at Sadie Carpenter 1 on TikTok, and at Hell Yeah Sadie on Twitter or X, whatever it is now.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, good job.
I got it right. Yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. You have a great day. Bye-bye.
But old rolling river of time, you've healed me in too many days. No regrets, no confusion, there'll be no pollution. I'm so thankful I've decided